Okay, we are back with another Between the Pages book chat. And today our guest is fantasy horror and sci-fi author Troy Young. And we're going to talk about his books The Seeker of Solace and Stone of Death. And I'm going to turn it over to him and let him introduce himself. So take it away.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. Always love to be able to talk about my work and myself. And I've got two books out that I launched in September and would like to talk about them. Would like to be able to maybe talk about my other horror series as well, because I did just launch the second book of It in October. So was trying to get it out in time for Halloween. Managed to get the ebook out well in advance, but the paperback just came out October 30th. So I pretty much missed the Halloween window for the paperback. But yes, so I am a relatively new author. The very first thing I published was a short story back in April of 2018. And the whole reason I did that was I just wanted to try to learn what the self-publishing business was about. 2019. So just over 18 months since I published my very first thing, which I said was a short story. Second short story I published was one that was based on my youth. Went with my parents to visit their homeland in Cape Breton and heard about a sea monster that had been washed ashore. I was about 6, so we're talking about 43, 44 years ago. And I always wondered, what if that sea monster was real? It turned out to be just a basking shark, but what if it was real? And that was the catalyst for my very first story, which was intended to be a standalone. And it ended up spawning a, so far, 14-story arc out of 18. The first 14 stories are published. The first 12 are in 2 separate compilations. It's called The Other. It is Cthulhu Mythos, and it's all based in Canada. Well, except for 2 stories where my Canadian main character happens to go to Egypt briefly and then to Scotland. How do you deal with Cthulhu and Nyarlathotep and not go to Egypt? I don't know. And I just really like Scotland. So that's why I brought those 2 in. But that's a little bit of my background. But I did want to talk about 2 books today, Stone of Death and Seeker of Solace. So how does this normally go? Do I just keep rambling or?
I actually ask questions. I mean, you can ramble in answers to the questions.
Fair enough.
Okay, so speaking of the 2 books, give us an overview of both books.
Well, so Stone of Death was one I started to write back in February of 2019. I had just finished probably about 3 books worth of the thing that got me started into writing. And that's a contemporary humor book. So I don't know if your public following is interested in that. But it's a guy living in a trailer park who's out of work, lives with his going blind mother in Florida, and he knows he has a destiny to do greatness, but he doesn't know what it is, and he really doesn't have the inclination to get off his butt and make it happen. So it's his story, his coming of life story. But that was my baby. I was trying to find a traditional publisher to take it on, and I thought default I would do self-publishing, but I didn't want to risk it for my very first self-publishing foray. So I started to write this fantasy novel, and then I got sidetracked with all the cosmic horror stuff, and that ended up being the first thing I did. But I finally did finish the fantasy novel, and it lingered around for a good year before I finally said, you know what, let's make this put it actually into print. So I published it back in September, and it's a little bit different, right? Mainly because so many people, fantasy authors, take everything so seriously, right? And everything's got to be great and grand, and these big, massive, epic books. I mean, I love George R.R. Martin, but I don't want to read George R.R. Martin all the time, right? He's excellent. I'm trying to read Robert Jordan's Eye of the World right now. Everybody tells me this is great. Oh my God, I can't get into it. It's just too long. Like 4 pages to describe crossing a river. And I'm like, I'm out. Get to the point. So this book is a little bit of a departure from that. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but at its core, it is still a very solid fantasy novel. So I was trying to figure out, how do I compare it to something else? And the best analogy I could come up with is A Knight's Tale, the movie with Heath Ledger, because some people love that movie. I tend to like it. A lot of people don't like it, though, because of the modern day twists that they've put in, like the Nike swoosh and the fact that they can hear the rock soundtrack. And but at its core, it's a solid story with some great acting and some amazing fight scenes. So if you get caught up in the fact that, yes, they're dancing the golden years and singing along to it, and that takes you out of things, I think you're missing out on a great movie. And that's what I'm looking at with my book here. There's no kings or queens. None of them are the world's greatest swords wielders. It's a bunch of kind of just average people that stumble into a quest and have no choice but to continue it. And they're in a race against two groups, a death cult, and another secret society, because they've uncovered information on this artifact called the Stone of Death, which could eliminate all life on the planet. So obviously we know why the death cult wants it. They want to use it to eliminate all life on the planet. And the other group ostensibly wants to stop them from doing that, but we're not quite sure if their motives are exactly pure too, and whether or not they're intending to use this. So these four individuals, including our main character, Cal, who was a former farm boy who ran away to join a mercenary company and is now, slinking back home with his tail between his legs, his dream of fame and fortune and glory never having come to pass, when he encounters these people and gets drawn into this quest basically against his own judgment, will, decision. And if they don't stop, the assassins will kill them anyway, because they know they've got information that can't get passed on to anybody else. So that's their impetus to continue. So you've really kind of got four people ill-prepared for this, on this amazing quest to stop this tragedy from happening. And I kind of delve in some of the things. Like, you never hear anybody in a fantasy novel complain that, once again, we're stuck out on the road for like the 14th day, sleeping on the ground in October when it's rainy and cold. Like, that's what they talk about. You fall into an icy cold river or whatever. You get covered in mud. You've got to jump in the icy cold river to clean yourself up. Like, these are little mundane things that always get glossed over. But I think that adds a level of realism to your characters. It makes them real, makes us able to connect with them a little bit more. Because last I checked, I'm not a king, and you're probably not the world's greatest swords wielder, although maybe you are. I don't know.
I actually can wield a sword, but I'm not the greatest.
So that's the whole point then, right? Like, these are just average Joes that get caught up in a quest. And I'm a little disappointed in the sales on that one, to be honest. It's not that I haven't even had a chance to really connect with readers so that they can say, I don't like this. That's fine. If you don't like it, that's one thing, but I haven't even gotten enough people to read it yet to say they don't like it. So this is why I'm trying to branch out, and hopefully some people will not only read it, but actually like it. So it's the first of 4 books I intended in that series, each written from a different point of view. So there's 4 main characters. So each book is from that main character's point of view. So the first one starts out as our farm boy mercenary. The next one starts out as this crippled magus who's just out of the academy. The next one will be, there's an older man who's a priest. And the last one is this mysterious woman. And she's the wrap up to the whole event. But I enjoyed writing it. Every time I go back to read it, I enjoy it. Stone of Death. Yeah. I don't know. I've got a copy of it here somewhere. And maybe it's the cover. I don't know what's turning people off. But here's the Stone of Death. Oops. There we go. See? So that's that one. The other one being The Seeker of Solace, which is a sci-fi Western. Great timing with The Mandalorian season 2 just coming out 2 days ago. And it was actually while watching The Mandalorian that I thought, there's not enough sci-fi westerns out there. I loved Firefly when it was on. I have the series on DVD. Go back and watch it. Also really loved the video game Red Dead Redemption. And I thought, let's marry the two a little bit more. And that's what it is. So it starts out like a typical Western. We've got an outlaw who's been captured during a failed bank heist. His gang has abandoned him, and he's up on the gallows about to be executed when a marshal shows up in town and basically says, you got two choices. Either you go back up on those gallows and everything ends right here, or you go and hunt down the gang members for me. So obviously he chooses to hunt down the gang members. So it's him coming to grips with the terrible, horrible things he's done his entire life and investigating the choices that he made as a young man that started him on this path. And what does he have to do to seek his own redemption? So yeah, I really enjoyed writing that one. When it started, I literally finished it in 12 days because I got on a roll and it almost wrote itself. And I'm working on its sequel right now, which is called The Denial of Deliverance, which is coming out in December. So those are the two that I've got right now that I'm really pushing.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the SciFi World. Is it Earth-based or is it...
Oh, it's a big, massive galactic empire, and there is an allusion to it that Earth is now but one of many planets that was ultimately allowed into this galactic empire because, my main character is a human, and there is a conversation at one point about the human homeworld being allowed in and how we almost didn't want you guys in because of, your general nature, which most people find off-putting, humans. You think you're better than everybody else, right? And everything that's going on. So the illusion is there, and yes, the Earth is part of this galactic empire. When is it set? Way, way, way in the future for us. But there is no real reference to Earth other than the fact that there's, like I said, the passing reference to the human homeworld. But it is this, think of it like the Star Wars Empire, right? This sprawling, mega, heavily bureaucratic series of worlds. And the worlds are divided into what are called neg worlds and prime worlds. So the prime worlds are all the really good worlds where the government has its bases and where everything is set up. And they have all sorts of extra stuff on these prime worlds, where the neg worlds tend to be where like the heavy manufacturing and stuff happens. So they're doing all the horrible, disgusting things that are just terrible to deal with, while the people who live in the prime worlds live in these, glorious utopias. Kind of like the movie Elysium, I guess, right? Where you've got all the rich people living up on the thing and down below it's just squalor. But some of the negs are nicer, they just don't have the infrastructure. So it's this convoluted world, and he grew up on a prime world and did something bad as a young man and gets banished basically to the negs, and the negs are filled with these criminals that are just going around preying on people. And even in the negs there's a hierarchy, right? Some are basically frontier places like you would find in the Old West, while some of them are a little bit more better developed. So, but these guys tend to stick to the neggiest of neg worlds, as they call it, because that's where they can fly under the radar and do their nefarious deeds. So it is a very complex society that I've created in a relatively short novel. As well, we've got a whole variety of alien races that are brought into play, and there's a lot of high science fiction mixed in with the Old West feel too. Like the Old West tropes are all there. Gets into a gunfight at one point where he gets ambushed out in front of a brothel. He's been to saloons, and the final confrontation may or may not be like a high noon draw, something like that. So I did take the very standard Western tropes that show up in most Westerns and apply them directly to a high level of science fiction writing. So I think it's a good blend. And I'm just starting. It's finally starting to pick up. I'm starting to see some sales, starting to see some page reads, starting to get some reviews in, and the reviews have all been solid. So I think I did something really well with this one.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a great book.
Thank you.
So, what is the hardest type of scene for you to write in fantasy and in sci-fi, if there's a difference?
The hardest type of scene to write in these things. Most of my stuff tends to be very dialogue heavy. I tend to like having very strong, dynamic, real characters. But I find those to be kind of easy, actually. So to me, it's the big descriptor scenes that I worry get boring. If it's dialogue, it can be fast paced, right? There's a lot of stuff that you can get across in dialogue. But I mean, I start to read something like a Tolkien, right? Where he'll go on for a page and a half describing the setting of a valley. And that's where I'm like, I can't do that. I just can't delve into it. I prefer to give you enough hints about it so that you as the reader can draw the imagination, but you're creating it in your own mind. So how you view the scene may be different than another reader. Whereas if I were to go too heavy-handed and structure it all out, I'm basically forcing everybody to see it the same way. So those types of scenes I find are the hardest for me, because I think those are the types of scenes I'm least interested in reading about. So yeah, I tend to write what I would like to read, which is quick, witty dialogue, easy to consume. I like a book that I can power through in a day or two, right, to move on to the next one. I don't necessarily like a book that I'm lugging around for weeks, and I find that I have to almost force myself to go through.
Okay, so what's your favorite type of scene to write?
Oh, my favorite type of scene to write is the very type of, I like scenes where the characters have to be introspective, where they're discovering something about themselves. And in this learning process of who and what they are, this frank dissection, they learn clarity about themselves. Because I find those type of introspective scenes ultimately then drive where I'm going. The way I write, I'm a little bit of a pantser, so I know where I have to get to, but I don't always know how I'm going to get there. So these types of introspective scenes, to me, they add a lot more new energy to my writing, and they excite me because I've just learned something too. A lot of times when I'm writing that kind of a scene, like I said, I kind of know where they're going to get there, but I don't know how. I don't know what they're going to really discover about themselves. And I try to make my characters complex, and none of them are ever alike, right? Like you'll never go, well, that's clearly a Troy Young book. Why? Because all his characters are the same way. Some people like that, right? They want to read a Troy Young book over and over and over again because the characters are all the same. But that's not me. So this type of scene allows me to learn about them. And I guess that also makes me learn about myself, because it's almost impossible for an author not to include a little bit of themselves in everything they write. So that frank discussion that they're having with themselves, also reflective of who I am putting the scene together. So yeah, I like those kind of scenes.
Okay, so the main character in Stone of Death, the first book, is a farm boy who doesn't get the glory.
Yes.
as opposed to most farm boys in fantasy novels who go off and get the glory.
Yep.
So you've twisted the trope there. Are there any other tropes that you've twisted in the fantasy book?
Oh, wow. In the Stone of Death, pretty much every trope is twisted. The only one that is overdone, and I did it right off the bat, and I did it on purpose for that very reason, is the whole let's meet in an inn, right? So yes, it does start, and I actually sent it off to a publisher, and they rejected it after only reading not even the first chapter, because they said, oh, well, you started out in an inn. There's nothing interesting about that. And I'm like, well, you should have read to the next chapter, because nothing is the same. There's a character at one point, she comes across very much as a Mary Sue type character, right? That she can do everything. And they even think she can. And she's very quick to put them in their place to say, that is so not true. I mean, I look good next to you guys. That's not because I'm great. That's because you suck, basically, right? The guy wants to be a hero and thinks that all heroes wield swords. And of course he carries a sword. And she's like, well, you're useless with that sword. You pull that sword out, you're going to die. Somebody's going to kill you because you suck with it. And the quicker you learn that you suck with it, the better off you are. I took a lot of these different elements that I find get overused, and I either poke fun at them, or I ignore them, or I wrote the exact opposite, right? Like you would expect the heroes to be competent, right? Like that's what makes them a hero, right? I think really what makes people a hero is when you overcome your own shortcomings, right? Like look at the movie Thor. The best part to me of that movie was when he decides he's going to stride out there to face the Devastator armor with no powers. Because that's truly a hero. It's easy to be Thor when you are the son of Odin and you can throw around lightning bolts and are virtually indestructible and have that magic hammer. It's a lot tougher to be Thor when all that's taken away from you. And yet he does it, right? Yeah. So to me, that's what makes a character interesting. I don't want a character who knows he's capable enough to go on and take on almost any challenger. Where's the fun in that? Right? Like I grew up reading Conan and I loved Conan. But let's face it, there was never going to be anybody in a Conan story that was going to be better than Conan. You knew he was going to come through everything because that was the nature of it. I wanted characters that made people go, they might not survive this, or somebody might not survive this, or somebody's going to screw this up, because I think that's more real, right? So I took aside all the tropes of heroes and accomplishing great things and just being competent, and tried to make people that they're just doing their best. In some cases, they just get lucky. And of course, they get better as the thing goes on too, but people have to evolve. Characters that are the same at the end of a story that they were at the beginning, I find are boring stories, right? So these characters truly get to know who they are and what they're about, and learn something about not only themselves, but each other along the way. So that's Stone of Death.
Okay, so speaking of characters, do you have any quirky characters in either book?
Oh, yeah. Lots of quirky characters. World is filled with quirky characters. They have this, in the Stone of Death, again, you've got this ship's captain that they end up meeting at the end. She is a very short and voluptuous and hypersexed woman that is basically coming on to all the men in the group, but in a fun way. She laughs at the discomfort that she places them in, right? And she's big and she's bold and, rings on her fingers and everything like that. There are some very... there's the main characters themselves. So the Magus that I mentioned earlier, he's a cripple. So imagine having to go across the land and be living on the land and stuff with a person who physically is just not capable, and they have to help him along. but also there's a love of coffee. I've introduced coffee in there, and they're in a very cosmopolitan city at one point, and he introduces the one character to coffee, and then now he's fallen in love with this, but they're now out in the woods again, and all he's doing is lamenting the fact that there's no coffee around. Why did you ever introduce me to this? Because now I can't stop thinking about it, kind of thing. They go to a spa. Have you ever read a fantasy novel where characters go to a spa?
No.
No. So they went to a spa. Why not? It's a wealthy cosmopolitan city that they go to, and it's a suite of rooms, and they've got hot and cold baths and big fluffy feather pillows to lay on, and they serve you, and they'll come and massage you, and they're like, oh, this is great. And the one guy who's basically paying for it, he's gone off somewhere else, and he comes into them later and he goes, so where are you guys staying? And they're like, well, we're still at the spa. And he's like, you're still at the spa? And they're like, yeah. Well, who's paying for that? And they're like, you are. And he's like, what? Oh God, yeah, like but little quirky things like that you never see. But you know what? It's not a very modern like spa. But it would have been the equivalent of what you may have found in it's more of set in a Renaissance level of society, right? Of technology and stuff like that. There was bound to be nice places that people of means went to.
Well, spas have a long history way back to ancient times. So yeah, it fits
exactly. Right in. So they're staying in the lap of luxury, and they're lamenting that they're going to find out this information that we're here to find, which then means we're back out on the road, giving all this up. Like, this is awesome. Can we just stay here another day or two? Because this is great. I like it. I haven't slept like this in years. This is so comfy, and nobody knows we're here, and nobody would think to look for us here, right? They're going to think we're hiding out in some, disgusting inn or a hole that we found. Nobody's going to think to look for us here. This is great. This is the most comfortable and safe we've been, and we got to give it all up. God darn it, right? Like, so little quirky things like that. Now, in Seeker of Solace, the quirks tend to be more minor characters that they encounter. Like, there's a couple funny little aliens that are working at a spaceport that he's getting his ship upgraded at, and things of that nature. But I do like to include quirkiness and humor in my stuff. Even in my cosmic horror, there's a little tiny bit of humor thrown in, because quite honestly, I think if somebody were dealing with this kind of stuff, the inability to find any humor in a situation would further drive your descent into madness. Humor, I think, in front of everything else, helps maintain sanity, helps maintain just normalcy. And I think we all crave it, and we all look for it. And only the most jaded and cold individual out there doesn't find humor every now and then to be something that is helpful. So yeah, I try to include a little bit of it. And this is what I started off, or I think it was in our conversation before we started, about so much fantasy and even sci-fi just takes itself so seriously all the time. And that's great, but there has to be room for the inclusion of something else, because you know what, again, this is what comes down to realism and realistic characters. We are all like that as people. I would prefer to read a book about characters that I can at least relate to on a level. If I can't relate to them, it's hard to follow along with the story.
Yeah, you want your characters to be relatable, that's for certain.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think we'll wrap it up here for today, and I'll let you tell everyone where they can find you and your delightfully sounding books.
Great, thank you. Well, everything is on Amazon. Everything is enrolled in Kindle Unlimited. So if you're a Kindle Unlimited reader, you can find them there. So you're looking for The Stone of Death, The Seeker of Solace. And my 2 books in the cosmic horror series are both entitled The Other, Encounters with the Cthulhu Mythos. As I said, they're set in Canada, which is kind of a departure. I've never read any real Cthulhu Mythos story set in Canada. So if there are any Canadian fans here and you want to give it a try, I recommend it, obviously, because I wrote it. But we've got stories in Cape Breton and in Halifax, Muskoka. Just outside of Toronto, there's a story. They go up to Nunavut to Alert. One story is in Alberta, one is in BC, one is in Quebec City. Like, it's everywhere, right? So if Saskatchewan, if you are a Canadian, you will see references to places that you're aware of and familiar with. And I think that adds a certain groundedness then to the sheer nightmare of the cosmic horror genre, which I really enjoyed doing. So those are my 4 books that are out right now. As I said, they're all on Amazon. You can follow my author page there. I do have a website. It's called FloridaManTheNovel.com, because the first novel that I wrote was about a guy living in the trailer park in Florida. So that's the name of my website, which has been since transitioned to my author site, and all of my books are there as well.
Okay, so thank you for being here. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Loved having this opportunity. Thank you.
And Between the Pages Book Chat will be back next weekend with some more authors, so join us then. So bye for now.